On Facebook, a posting was made not long ago, and it was sent to a correctional facility in Oklahoma, and this was the posting. Simply a question: how do I contact the facility regarding your inmates that sex offenders have a cell phone in your prison and they're having contact with children on social media? An inmate that is a sex offender with a cell phone in a prison in Oklahoma contacting children should give a chill to all of us. I wish it was the only example. Just in Oklahoma, last year, 7,518 cell phones that were contraband cell phones were picked up in Oklahoma prisons just last year. 7,518 contraband cell phones. This is within the correctional facility. Now, this is from one of the facilities. That table is 12 foot long, and in many spots, the cell phones are stacked up 10 deep on this picture. These were all taken from inside the prison. If you want to know what that looks like for the whole state and how that's gathered, the picture would look like this. This is the gathering of cell phones from my state, from correctional facilities across the state. The challenge that we have is, for all of us, how do we stop these cell phones from getting inside the prison? That's a corruption issue, and sometimes it's a perimeter issue. Will it be wrapped up in duct tape and thrown over the fence? They'll be slipped through at some point. They'll have a guard or a person who works inside the prison be paid off to be able to deliver it, to be able to drop it in a certain spot. But the result of it is the same. Contact with people outside. Contact that leads to dramatic effects. Not only contact with people outside like these predators that are reaching out to children from even inside the prison that are sex offenders, but it has over and over again consequences. We have consequences of individuals, for instance, white-collar criminals that are continuing to be able to run their company. There was a famous occasion of the person that was known as the pharma bro that bought up pharmaceutical companies, drove out competition, and then jacked the price up on it. They ended up going to federal prison on this. But even from within the prison, he was able to get access to a cell phone in the prison and continue running his pharmacy operation even inside the prison. There's an occasion not long ago in Oklahoma that an individual who is a murderer, while he's in the state penitentiary, used smuggled cell phones to direct others to distribute methamphetamine for him across all of northeastern Oklahoma. He's running a meth ring with his cell phone inside the prison. There was a prison facility, a Lee Correctional Facility, that there was a mass riot that broke out inside the facility. In that riot, 7 inmates were killed, 17 others were injured in the riot. This happened in South Carolina. Afterwards, the South Carolina Corrections Department director blamed cell phones for fueling the deadliest prison riot they had had in South Carolina. In another case, back in an Oklahoma prison, many of those charged within the prison have gang ties: MS-13, Crips, Indian Brotherhood, Universal Aryan Brotherhood, Irish Mob. Those records show that those individuals had access to cell phones and were running their gangs outside the prison from inside the prison. We have one individual serving 20 years in prison for robbery and assault with a dangerous weapon and drug manufacturing, used a cell phone to control the methamphetamine distribution and transactions outside the prison. We have a case in the Northern District of Oklahoma right now where there's a RICO case, which is for racketeering, that is happening from large numbers of cell phones in an Aryan Brotherhood gang that is a white supremacist group that is operating a drug ring outside the prison, coordinating their work and operation inside the prison. This is not unique to Oklahoma. This is happening in prisons all over the country. And we can go to one after another after another. The two issues that have to be addressed: stopping the flow within them, but the second more obvious issue that I hear from people when I raise this issue to them is they say, why can't the prisons just jam the cell phones? Great question. Federal law does not allow state prisons to jam the cell phones. Why don't we change that law? Great question. A question that should have been answered by this body a long time ago, but communications companies and cell phone company lobbyists overwhelm this body and push back and say, let's study the issue. For years, the cell phone lobby has come to members of Congress and said, totally agree with you, that's a problem, let's study it. I've met personally for now several years with the leadership of the FCC, who has the jurisdiction over this, and said, let's resolve this issue about prison cell phones. And every year when I meet with FCC folks, they say, we're studying it. At the same time, meth rings and sexual predators are operating inside our prisons. We're studying it. I waited patiently until the last study just came out. If you want to know the summary of the last study that just came out on cell phones in prisons and jamming it, the study basically came back and said, we need more study on this issue, was the result of the study. So much so that one of the prisons actually got permission and a waiver to be able to test a cell phone jammer in their prison, what's called a micro jammer, where they could put a jammer just to block the cell phone coverage in that one particular housing unit. They came back with the results of that from one individual state prison and said it was successful. The cell phone companies responded back to that, hey, we wish you would have included us in that study. We should have been involved in that study, but we need to do another study on top of your study to make sure that it's all correct. Study after study after study, when this is what is happening in our prisons. So let me just bring this up to the cell phone industry. You do not want your company name attached to pedophiles in prisons that are contacting children outside the prison, waiting until they're released. You do not want your company name attached to a meth ring being operated inside a prison because you wanted to study the issue more. And you do not want your company name attached to a prison riot where they took it directly back to the access for cell phones leading to that riot. Every one of the major cell phone companies in the United States has done lab testing of jammers in their labs. This is not something that needs to be studied again. They all know the results. And what's worse than that, if you go back to 2005, New Zealand as a country already saw this issue rising in 2005. New Zealand worked with all of the cell phone companies in New Zealand, and guess what? They studied it and then implemented a policy to start jamming cell phones in their prison in the years later. Oh, the cell phone companies overseas have already studied this in New Zealand? Well, let's take it to 2012 in the UK. In 2011, all the cell phone companies worked with the UK government to be able to study cell phones in prisons, came to a decision of what's the best way to be able to jam those signals in the UK, and in 2012, they passed a piece to be able to get this resolved. So, this has been studied in the labs, it's been studied in New Zealand, it's been studied in the UK, and now all we're hearing over and over again is it needs to be studied more here and here and here and here. My suggestion is simple. Let's jam cell phone in prison for the protection of our guards, for the protection of our families, and to be able to block criminal activity from happening inside our prisons. We know how to do this. We have the technology to do this. This body needs to address it in law and make sure it gets resolved in the days ahead. I look forward to passing that, not doing one more study and delaying action on it. With that, I yield the floor.